many a biker's buying decision. And so here are my picks of the best looking new bikes from each manufacturer for 2024, and of course we're going in price order ascending. Now first up at £5,599, we've got the Husqvarna Svartpilen 401, which I think is a fantastic looking bike considering the price point and also the fact that it's A2 license friendly. It's had a substantial update for the new model year with lots of interesting little tweaks and changes, including a new TFT display which looks very premium for the price. But also the overall styling has evolved, and while the fundamental design language is similar to the previous generation Svartpilen 401, this more elongated and stretched out look I think makes it look more substantial, which suits the kind of rugged appearance. Now the 401 is also available in a more road bias spec called the Vitpilen 401, and while it's undoubtedly the better handling road bike, for me, on the looks front, the Svartpilen has the edge, with the spoke wheels, chunky tyres and the stealthier looking paint job all giving it a bit more visual interest. Now also representing extremely good value for money I think, it's the Royal Enfield Shotgun 650, which is new for this model year and I think probably the best looking bike now in their lineup. It's heavily based upon their Supermeteor 650, which is a more stretched out cruiser style bike, but the Shotgun takes that quite traditional looking aesthetic and modernizes it with a graphical paint scheme and blacked out hardware. It's also an excellent bike to ride with a more upright and aggressive ergonomic that means you can get on top of it a little more. And with the air-cooled parallel twin at the heart of it, there's bags of soul and character. For me, I think I'd have to go for the stencil white paint job that was actually on the bike that we reviewed, but as always, Enfield offer a nice selection of other schemes, so there should be something to suit all tastes. But if you fancy something a little more sporty, then you can't go far wrong with an Aprilia RS 660. It's a brilliant middleweight sports bike that offers bags of fun out on the road, but also it's got a decent riding position that isn't too aggressive, and so it's actually quite usable and comfortable. A lot of the looks are inherited from the more premium RS V4 sports bike, with almost the exact same front end and a lot of similarities in the paint jobs, and I think my pick of the bunch would be the Extrema edition, which has a slightly more racy finish, along with a carbon SC Project silencer and a carbon lower fairing and carbon front mudguard. Now no doubt a splash of carbon adds a little bit to the looks, but also these parts combined save 3 kilograms of weight, which isn't to be sniffed at. Now for 2024, Ducati announced this completely new Hypermotard 698 with a brand spanking new single-cylinder engine that makes a fairly impressive 77.5 horsepower. Undoubtedly, this is going to be a brilliant bike to ride, and we'll be getting one for review as soon as possible. But in the meantime, purely from a styling perspective, I think it's fair to say they've done a fantastic job as well. Naturally, it looks a little more slender than the 950 equivalent, which I think suits this style of bike really well. And then they also offer it in their RVE paint scheme, which adds a bunch of graphics and more vibrant color choices that again, I think is a perfect match for a supermoto style bike. There is also of course the option of the standard Ducati red, but for me, the RVE wins this one hands down. The R12 is BMW's new entry into the sort of middleweight cruiser market, and on paper, I've got to admit I wouldn't expect this to be a particularly great looking bike. Certainly their last attempt, the R1200C, wasn't exactly a looker, but when this bike was announced at Motorcycle Live at the back end of last year, I have to say I was extremely impressed. There's just something about the proportions which look quite nice to me, and I also think it's great that they've retained a lot of BMW signature features and design language rather than going down the corny Harley copy route. Now, as with most new BMWs, there's the option to spec it up with one of their Option 719 finishing packages, which generally add a more intricate paint scheme as well as billet hardware, and for this particular bike it's the one that really stands out to me with a punchy yellow, black and silver combo, along with some spoke wheels with gold anodization on the rims. Now before we get on to the next bike, I just want to say a massive thanks to today's video sponsor, and that's Cardo. Cardo make, in my opinion, the best comms headsets in the business, and in particular, we use their top-of-the-range Pack Talk Edge for all of our rides. Now this thing is absolutely rammed with features, but what I think it does best is just getting the basics absolutely right. You've got brilliant audio quality courtesy of some JBL design speakers, excellent noise gating so you don't get loads of wind noise in the mic, which can be quite distracting, and also the dynamic mesh communication system means you can pair up to 15 riders in a group with up to a mile between each, and the more riders that join, the stronger the connection gets. Also, if somebody drops off, they automatically get healed back into the group once they catch up, so there's no need to pull over and manually pair again. Genuinely, these headsets are absolutely fantastic and I can wholeheartedly recommend them, so do check out the link down in the description below to pick up yours. And you'll also find down there a discount code that's specifically for our viewers. So once again, a massive thanks to Cardo for their support, and with that, back to the bikes. Now over to Yamaha, and one of the most exciting announcements this year was the XSR 900 GP, which is essentially a half-fed version of their XSR 900 semi-retro naked that also gets some clip-on style handlebars for a more sporty riding position. Now hands down, this is one of my favorite looking new bikes of the year across the board, with a pop-in paint scheme that's inspired by their Marlboro race bikes of the past. Now if you want to give it the full sports bike treatment, then there's also a racer accessory kit, and that gives you the fairing lowers amongst a few other items, but personally, I think I like the half-fed version the best. Now the XSR 900 was already one of the best riding retro-inspired bikes on the market, and in this edition I think it's also fair to say that it's now one of the best looking too. So as you can imagine, we're trying to get one of these for review as soon as possible. Now I can't say that Honda have made any particularly big changes in the looks department to their new 2024 Africa Twin, but for me it was already one of the best looking adventure bikes on the market, and so there wasn't really any need to tear it up and start again. The bodywork has been tweaked ever so slightly with a more chiseled and sharp look, and if you put them side by side, you can see some of the changes to the details. So while it probably isn't worth rushing down to the dealer to trade in your 2023 model, it has to be said it looks just as good as ever and up to date with the competition. Now specifically for the base Africa Twin, my pick would be the tricolor paint job, although it is worth pointing out that only the red and black versions are available at the starting price of £13,199. In order to be able to spec up this red, white and blue, it's mandatory to add their electronic suspension package, which is about another 1,500 quid or so. Having ridden it recently though, I would say the extra versatility of the suspension alone would probably be worth it, and this particular finish is just the sweetener on top. It has to be said though, Moto Guzzi have put a good foot forward in terms of delivering one of the best looking adventure bikes too, with the new V100 Stelvio. Now this is based upon their new liquid-cooled V100 platform that was initially launched with the more road-biased V100 Mandello. And while I do think that's a very nice looking bike already, I also think the expanded dimensions and slightly more commanding stance of this Stelvio probably make it the better looking of the two. Some of the details on this bike are really very nice, like the jet fighter thruster inspired taillights, the vents that run along the side panels, and also the Mandello Eagle daytime running light up front. And all in all, it makes for a great looking bike with a nice balance of the rugged adventure bike vibe and some beautiful Italian design flair. Now fundamentally, I wouldn't necessarily say that the Kawasaki ZX-10R is normally my cup of tea. I usually prefer something a little bit more classic and traditional looking rather than the super angular modern sports bike design. But I had to include this new 40th anniversary edition on the list purely for the retro-inspired paint job that I think suits this bike absolutely perfectly. It's a bit of a throwback to their sports bikes of the 80s and 90s, and not only is it available on this ZX-10R, but also the ZX-6R and the ZX4RR, both of which in my opinion look equally good. Now KTM's design language is not necessarily always for everybody, with super angular shapes, aggressive bodywork and super bright orange paintwork 99% of the time. But there is one category of bike that I think this approach absolutely suits, and that's the Super Naked. New for 2024, we've got their updated 1390 Super Duke R, and it 100% delivers on their typical style, and for me, I think it's a good thing. Now perhaps the headlight will be a little bit of a contentious feature, with a new LED projector design and a daytime running light on a sort of frame around it, but I actually like what they've done. and I think it modernizes the look a little bit whilst also keeping that outer shape that references the previous model. Now you can get this bike either in the standard R model or the Evo with their super advanced electronic suspension, and both bikes come in either a black version or the more pop-in orange, which I think would have to be my pick of the two because it's a KTM. Now the Hayabusa is probably a bike that's going to visually divide opinion, but it has to be said it's an iconic shape that's instantly recognizable as one of the most famous bikes of the past few years. New for 2024 though, they've announced this 25th anniversary edition with a paint job that would do KTM proud, and it looks much more punchy than the previously available white or black versions. I think it really does work, and for me makes it the best looking Hayabusa of the past few iterations. Now over to Indian, and for a few hundred more quid, you could pick up their new limited edition version of their FTR Naked, which has been designed in collaboration with 100%, who are best known for making gear and goggles. The FTR is already a brilliant bike to ride with a super punchy 60-degree V-twin that makes 120 horsepower peak and 120 Nm of peak torque. But this version just takes it to the next level in terms of finish, with some really nice little touches all over the bike. Now I love this choice of color, which is completely different to anything that they've done before on an FTR, and the candy finish actually leaves a little bit of the carbon texture peeping through, which I think is a very nice touch indeed. White on the frame also adds a little bit of contrast, and I do like the graphical scheme on the tank, along with the block of red on the rims a la Ducati for a bit of a sporty vibe. Now it's been roughly 5 years since the current iteration of the Triumph Rocket 3 was introduced, and I think it's testament to the design that it looks just as good now, and still like it could be a concept bike on a stand at a motorcycle show. New for 2024 though, they've announced this updated Storm Edition, and while it does get a couple of technical improvements like some extra power at the top and some lighter wheels, you've also got this new stealthy finish with black all over the hardware and a choice of split finishes on the tank. Now you've still got the choice of the more sporty R version or the slightly more comfort biased GT, and for me, I think I'd have to go for the R just for the more aggressive and stripped back look. Each version comes in either a red, blue or graphite half on the tank, and given that this is such a mean looking bike, I think there's only one way to go, and that's black. Now we're getting on for some serious money here at €30,000, which is pretty much equivalent to around £26,000, and that's what you'll be paying for MV Agusta's new adventure bike called the LXP Oriole. This bike uses a new 950 triple that's much more torque and mid-range bias than the triples they've produced up until now, and that should make it much more usable for adventure-style riding. And although the price is pretty astronomical, it has to be said they've given it the absolute works in terms of chassis spec and also the technology package. From a looks perspective, obviously it's taken some inspiration from the Cagiva Elephant with the paint job, and it's got all of the typical MV Agusta design flair in the bodywork, with some beautiful contouring and some neat little touches like the light in front and rear, but just applied to the adventure bike format. But it couldn't quite top the list in terms of pricing though. In fact, it was some way off, with Harley-Davidson's new CVO Street Glide coming in just shy of £40,000. Now this was my pick of their new 2024 bikes, and while there is a Road Glide equivalent which gets a bigger frame-mounted fairing, the Street Glide would be my choice, with the slightly more traditional looking single headlight that I think better suits the overall aesthetic of the bike. Now if you want the full details of the new Harleys for 2024, then there's a video on the screen now, so you can give it a click and give it a watch in case you missed it. Do let me know your favorite looking bike on this list as well down in the comments below, or if there's something else new for 2024 that you think I've missed, hit subscribe as well if you haven't already to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.